So, anybody here know the NFB and what we do, what we've been doing for the last 80 years? So NFB is the National Film Board of Canada. In French we call it Office National du Film. It's been created in 1939 by somebody called John Greason. I have a few slides about him. I will talk a little bit about the history of the NFB and then talk about VR more specifically. So it was created to be the film commission, so the entity that would create cinema or film for the Canadian public. And the idea is that Canada was a huge country with, it's enormous in land size, but there was very little people on that big land size. It's a big country. And many provinces and many very different people, and they wanted to use cinema as a way to connect, to create an history for that very young country. But then the war came. There you go. So that's what we are now. So we create, we still create film, but we also do interactive work, social issues, documentary, and author animation. So I will do a very brief history of the NFB. I will talk about some of the innovation, technological innovation that we did over the years. Some things that we learned over the years about working with people and technology, and talk a little bit about the future and what's coming. Oh, and I think I will start with this little clip that I really like. It was a clip that we did for our 75th anniversary, just to for the occasion. But now we're 80-year-old, so that was 5 years ago. But I still love that clip. If it's playing, oh no, there's no sound. There it is. That's a great job of editing. Imagine going through the archive and finding all those clips. That was quite some work. Obviously no VR in there. 75 years. VR existed actually since the 60s, maybe even some experiment in the 50s, but we were not doing VR yet at the time. So as I was saying, the film board was created by the government of Canada, so we are an agency of the government of Canada, and they asked this man, John Greason, who was a British, to come to Canada and start the film board. He was already a famous filmmaker, and he's the one that came up with the word documentary. So the word documentary was created or invented by John Greason. And documentary actually became one of Canada's official national art. We're not the only one doing documentary, obviously, but we became famous because of the NFB, because of all the documentaries that we did. So it was founded in 1939. Canada at the time wasn't already part of the war effort for the Second World War, but shortly after, Canada got involved, and then the NFB was turned into what we call propaganda propaganda machine. So we started to do propaganda film, which is, you know, what happened during wars, videos, film, everything that can be used to communicate is used to do propaganda.
The Film Board produced over 500 films during the war, and I watched all but a missing few. Take it from me, you don't want to do this. There are precious few Churchill's Islands among a sea of pedestrian subjects. But I wasn't necessarily looking for masterpieces. As a lifelong documentary filmmaker myself, born just after the war, I wanted to see how we saw ourselves then, and how we presented Canada to Canadians and the world. For most of the past 2 centuries, we defined ourselves through Britain and the Empire, proud to share its values and its prejudices. The National Film Board would be the first effort to describe ourselves in our own terms. How they did that was in these films, and that was what I was looking for.
So that's a very remarkable documentary. It's available online on our website. It's called Shameless Propaganda, and it gives a pretty good idea of the history of the NFB, how it started, how it was used, and the film that were created during the war. So after the war, we could go back to start making films, and actually that happened during the war. I don't know if you've heard of Norman Mclaren. Any animators here, or the people doing animation? Norman Mclaren was a famous Scottish animator. He was already very well known at the time where John Grierson asked him to come to Canada to start the animation studio. Grierson thought that animation would be an interesting thing to have, both to help for the propaganda effort, but to really push movie making and art and creativity in a new direction. So this is Norman, and he came in 1941, but started the animation studio in 1942. And the goal, there was no animators in Canada at all. The goal was to start the studio and start teaching animation to animators. So that's the kind of work that Mclaren would do. So that's in 1941 during the war. It was, obviously there was no TV back then, so people would get their news and information through the movie theater. And this was basically a message from the government of Canada to tell people to mail early because of the war. Sending mail was difficult, would take a lot of time, but also they would make money from the sending mail that they would need, the government would need for the war effort. All that you see here was basically drawn on film directly, which was a famous technique that Mclaren had developed at the time. Mclaren was really an innovative filmmaker, developed many different techniques. I will talk about innovation a bit later, but there's famous film like Pas de Deux, Neighbors. Neighbors was one of the first animated short, actually was the first animated short to win an Academy Award in 1952. And there was actually no category at the time at the Oscar, at the Academy for animated short. It didn't exist. So they gave him an Academy Award for short documentary. Again, it's a very famous film if you have a chance to go see it online on our website, or even probably on YouTube or Vimeo. It's a very fantastic film. It's very actual. The subtext, the story about war and about loving your neighbor is still extremely actual right now. One technique that Mclaren pioneered and used in neighbors was pixelation. So it's the idea of doing animation with people instead of doing it just with stop motion with an animated object. So to have somebody that is actually moving, but frame by frame, and that was one of his inventions at the time. So some notable NFB innovation over the years. It's not all there. Again, Mclaren was experimenting with a lot of things, and one of these things was creating sound using the part on film that is meant to record sound. It's optical sound. It was an optical system, but we can define that as the first basically way of creating synthetic sound before a synthesizer, before the electronic era. It was very analog, but it was still a synthetic sound, and he developed all the technique and system with cards, with the special camera to be able to do that, and he created sound for a lot of his film that way.
It's quite simple device. It consists of a camera that takes a single frame at a time. When I push the button, it takes one frame, that's 24th per second. Now here is a bench that's lit, and there's a slot here, and this slot is so positioned that it photographs onto the soundtrack area of the frame at the side of the picture. This is my keyboard, which consists of a number of cards. This is the lowest note. I'll find a note of medium pitch. Looks like that. And the very highest note looks like that, which is a G sharp. There are semitones here in 6 octaves. And I consult my chart and select a particular card, put it in there, and then adjust these levers, because these levers control the width of this slot. If the slot is very narrow, the sound is very fine. If the slot is wide open, it's maximum, it's fortissimo.
Developed and printed, the film looks like this. 1 frame of film equals 4 sprocket holes, or 1/24th of a second. To create a musical chord, a single note is photographed. The film is wound back in the camera, the wedge is altered, and another note of the chord is photographed. And then a 3-note chord, and a 4-note chord. A simple device perhaps, but the result of several years of tests by Mclaren and his colleague Evelyn Lambert.
So it seems maybe obvious for a lot of you now, that kind of technology, but at the time it was really revolutionary. And now obviously we have synthesizers, we can do that on computers, it's pretty simple. but at the time this was very impressive. What Mclaren brought to the NFB wasn't just the creation of an animation studio, but it was really the whole spirit of letting artists, creators, single creators, not the whole studio, but every individual, the chance to experiment and to have the time to start their own project and make it the way they want to make it, and sometimes create, innovate, invent new ways of doing things. And this is still pretty much how we operate and what we do right now at the NFB. In 1951, Mclaren was asked by the BFI, the British Film Institute, to create a stereoscopic movie, animated stereoscopic movie that never had been done before. Just going to reduce the sound. So it was after the war, the government of England wanted to cheer up the public and try to change the mood. The city needed to be reconstructed. So what they did is they created this unique theater, movie theater called Telecinema, which was the most advanced theater at the time. There was a mixing studio, there was what would be the beginning of some kind of specialized sound. There was a quadraphonic system that they could mix in real time, and they had a 3D projection system. So that was two 35mm projector that were interlocked and would project an image for each eye. And they would use, exactly like in theater now, they would use glasses, 3D glasses with polarized filter. At the time it was linear polarized filter. Now we use mostly, what do you call that? The technology actually is now round polarized filter. But it's pretty much the same technology that you will find in an IMAX theater, 3D IMAX theater now. Mclaren was the first then to start using 2D elements, so animation made in 2D, to create that sense of depth. Disney made the film like that, but only in 1953. And by this time, Mclaren had done 4 films. This one, which is a twirly gig. No, this one is Now Is the Time. Now is the time, the title comes from Now is the time to put on your glasses. So there was this title at the beginning saying, okay, now is the time to put on your glasses, and the film was in 3D. So he did that, he did Twirly Gig, O Canada, and another film called Around is Around. What's interesting about Around is Around is that Mclaren used an oscilloscope to create the visuals. So it was really an early form of computer-generated or device-generated animation. So it used sound to create shape and was filming these shape, and by staggering the image would end up having 3D images from oscilloscope. And it's very impressive, and I had a chance in 2014 to do the restoration of these films for the MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and for a festival in Scotland. So I restored the 4 films, and I was amazed by how precise, how good the 3D was. And it's still hard now to do really good stereo films, and what he managed to do at the time, and even the risk that he took, blurring images, blurring the background, moving sometimes only one eye to create that sense of movement. It was exceptional. So very, very impressive. Again, this film, you can see the 2D version online. It's possible to get a Blu-ray version of the film to see it in 3D. And I hope eventually it'll be available on YouTube in 3D also. One of the other invention or innovation that came from the NFB is large screen cinema or multiple projection system. In 1967, there was this pavilion that was created where there was 2 big rooms that both had a different system of projection. One of the room had 5 screens, 1 on the floor, 4 in the front, 4 live screen like that. There was another room, if I remember well, that had projection on the side. So the idea was to develop a way of doing immersive cinema. And from these research, IMAX was founded. So the people that were working at the NFB on this project ended up creating the IMAX camera at the NFB with the NFB engineers, and IMAX was then developed, and now there's IMAX theater and IMAX film all over the world. Another place where the NFB was a pioneer was computer animation in the early days. This is a film called Hunger, and it might seem like nothing right now, but we're talking 1971, so way before Maya, way before any other computer animated system. So the technique used was a pause-to-pause system, so the animator would draw something on the computer, on some form of digital tablet, and the computer would do the interpolation between one frame to another. And you can also see this film online. So that's 1970. It was released in 73. It was released in 73, but the first test was done in 71. The film was released in 73. It was nominated for an Oscar again at the Academy Award. It's very, very, very impressive film. So pretty much one of the first computer-generated film in the world. I don't know if you've heard of Softimage. Softimage was the 3D software that was used to do Jurassic Park. So the first film where a lot of the VFX and the animation was done on computer. Now we see that obviously there's no film coming from the United States that doesn't have VFX done in Maya or so Softimage was the first really strong animation software, and it was also developed at the NFB. We also developed with IMAX Corporation, a software called Sandy. Sandy stands for, if I remember well, Software for Animation and Drawing. I'm trying to remember, in 3D or something. And Sandy is kind of an acronym in Japanese for 3 dimension. Anyway. The concept was pretty revolutionary. The software was first developed in 1992, and the production 3D software was available in 1998. I don't know if you know Tilt Brush. Anyone know Tilt Brush by Google Tilt Brush? So Sandy was pretty much the same thing. Way ahead. The animator would work in front of a large screen with 3D glasses, so stereoscopic projection. Would have a wand, and we call that a wand, so in his hand, and would be able to draw in space, in 3D space. And it was a complete animation package, so not only the animator could make drawings, but these drawings could be animated with a timeline, frame by frame, or with an extrapolation system. So it was really an advance. It made possible the creation of Falling in Love Again, which was one of the first film, wasn't the first, but I think the second one made with Sandy, and we've made a number of projects with Sandy after that. And our first, I will show you images of that. I don't think I have this in this presentation, but I have other presentation with me. Our first VR project was actually done in Sandy in 2014. Shortly after Oculus became a thing, after the Kickstarter in 2012, Facebook Oculus, and then we saw the first Oculus development kit. We were already working on the idea of making a VR project. So we modified Sandy to be able to do a rendering 360 degree. And because the software was already meant for 3D, for perfect stereoscopic viewing, we could do a VR project that way. I will show you images of it later. Oh, actually, I have images of that. So this is Minotaur VR. Minotaur was our first VR project. You can see it on Facebook VR or YouTube VR if you have a VR headset. And the music was by Kid Koala, who's a famous DJ. That's pretty trippy in VR. It was interesting because we learned a lot doing this project. It wasn't a big risk because the original film was meant to be a standard, cinema movie, stereoscopic movie. But we decided to try to do a VR version of that. So it wasn't a big investment. We already had a lot of the animation that was done, and we were already in a software that was doing stereo. But we learned a lot about what works in VR. But
It's just fixing microphone for professors.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry.
you can hear it anyway?
Yeah. This is it.
All right.
Just go ahead.
We learned a lot for what can be done. That sense of presence. Does it work if you don't know who you are? What makes you sick? What doesn't make you sick? In VR, and the sound. The original film had a sound recorded and mixed for a 7.1 theater release, and then we tried to take that sound and see how we can make a spatial sound from a 7.1 that would work in VR. At the time, the playback technology was almost absent. There was only the Samsung Gear that could play some kind of special sound, usually a 5.1 or a binaural 4-channel mix. But we started experimenting with that and we learned a lot. Another thing that the NFB is really famous for and won tons of awards and was presented at all over the world is interactive documentary. And we did a lot of interactive projects, both in Flash for a long time, and in HTML5 and in WebVR now. So we worked with the New York Times, we worked with The Guardian, we worked with Google to create all sorts of projects. You have access to a lot of them still on our website that are using new technology, interactive technology to tell a story and to explain how the world works. The short story of the I-Rise is probably one of the interactive projects that won the most awards all around the world. It's a very interesting project. And there's 3 or 4 versions of it. Bear 71 was used by Google. The original project was done in Flash. We made another version in HTML5, and Google used this as a test version to see what we could do in WebVR. And we do collaboration like that with a lot of people. We work with Mozilla for Firefox to develop the WebVR with them also. Especially for the sound. Sound in WebVR is very complicated, and they use one of our projects called Way to Go. Way to Go was at the View conference last year, and Mozilla used this project to develop WebVR and especially the sound part of WebVR. It says over 13,000 production. Actually, it's over 17,000. Obviously, since 1939. So that includes documentary film, short film, a little bit of fictions, and a lot of animated shorts. Over 7,000 awards. We have 12 Oscars. We have 75 Academy Award nomination in 80 years. So that's almost one nomination a year. That's more than any Hollywood studios or pretty much anyone in the world. We had Palme d'Or, Screen Awards, Webby Awards, name it. That was our last nomination actually, was Animal Behavior. That was last year. And I suspect, I shouldn't say that, I might jinx it, but we have a project by Theodore Huchev that just been released in festival that I suspect will be at least shortlisted. It's really a masterpiece. Lessons we learned over the year. If you want to be successful, you have to be open to collaborations. We do a lot of collaboration, and it's also a way to not have to finance the whole project. It's also a way to get talent and to meet new talent. But thank you. We work a lot with co-producers, so we do co-production internationally with Croatia, with England, with I don't think we did one with Italy yet. I'm hoping that will change. But we have co-production with many countries around the world. We work with newspaper, we work with game studio, we work with broadcasters. We do installation in public space. Festivals, universities, museum. It's really a way to really figure out how storytelling can reach people in different places with different background, and sometimes just create new ways of communicating. Collaboration makes you better. By collaborating, by working with others, you just learn more, you learn faster, and you get better. You have to to open your doors, so we do a lot of things to foster new talent. In the animation studio, we have a program called Hot House that is specifically for animation, where we get 6 young filmmakers that haven't done any professional work yet, and in a period of 3 months, it's crazy, it's incredibly intense. They sleep at the NFB, but in 3 months we take them from the first concept, the basic idea that they have, and the storyboard, the animatic, and all the steps to make a professional film. That means working with a sound designer, working with a composer, the final online, the rendering, and that is no matter what the techniques that they want to use. So it can be a 2D hand-drawn film, or it can be a CG film, or it can be, it's very open. But to do that in 3 months, it's just a 1-minute film, but trust me, 1 minute going through all these steps, it's a lot of work. But it's been a very successful program because over 50% of the people that went through this program either made professional films after, became directors, or are still working in the industry. So that's actually a pretty good number. Our friend at the Interactive Studio, we have 2 Interactive Studios, one in Vancouver and one in Montreal. The Montreal one is the French Interactive, Vancouver is the English Interactive Studio. The French Interactive have this program called Jeune Pousse, and it's a little bit the same thing. They get interns or new talents to create. They work together on one interactive project, and it leads to sometimes an iPhone app, sometimes a website. And it's really the student or the people coming that decide on the story and what will be the output, but they have the help of the whole NFB. We are technology agnostic. That means that we're open to everything, all the technology that exists. We don't want to develop only for one type of technology or one type of output. We're open to everything as long as it works with the story that the creator wants to tell. We will question every time if somebody comes with a story and say this is a VR piece and we think it should be a short film, we're not going to make a VR project. It has to work with the final output. I will talk about that a little bit more later, but that's very important. It's not because sometimes we will do a project just to explore the technology, but when it comes from a creator with an idea and something to tell and a story to show, it has to work with the destination and the output and the technology used. There's a lot of VR projects that were pitched that are actually would be a good film, and then it should be a film, because if it would work better as a film, we shouldn't probably do a VR project with that. But there are projects that are meant for VR and definitely work well in VR or XR. We also use technology like chatbot to tell story. AI, we're exploring right now the possibility of using these deep learning AI. We had documentary that were entirely you going online and talking with a chatbot, and you don't realize by doing that you actually learn things and messages that we were trying to express. So the meaning or the story drive the technology. So that's what I was saying. So it's first, the story is always first, always. So the creator comes with an idea. We help push the story as far as we can, and then we will focus on technology and the best way to express that story. Yeah, at the animation studio, it means we're still doing stop motion projects, so it's very traditional. Obviously, now we're using robots, we're using programmable light. We create our own light fixture with LED that we 3D print. So we're always pushing technology, but sometimes in a very traditional media, but we're making more of it. 3D printers for stop motion was an obvious match. This is a 3-meter stereoscopic dome that I created to be able to review our VR project. So you can be 4 or 5 in front of the dome and see a stereoscopic projection of what somebody is looking at in VR in real time. That's another thing. How do you adapt to technology, to new technology? Our philosophy usually at the NFB is you shouldn't have to adapt to it. You should be adopting it. So if you have to convert or to change your way of creating to adapt to it, then there's probably something wrong with the technology. It's probably not ready. If you're good at something and it works, maybe you should still do that until the technology is ready for what you want to do, or you feel that the technology really respond or correspond to what you want to express. And that's when you're adapting. It doesn't mean that you're not inventing. We created the IMAX camera, we created Sandy, we're using photogrammetry, we did rear projection way ahead of Superman, the first Superman. It's all things that we're exploring, but it's only because it fits and we know it's ready and we're ready to use that. But we're not forcing adaptation to technology. That's pretty much what I said. You adapt it to your needs. We have very high standards, so before something comes out of the NFB, it goes through a lot of quality control on all the levels: the visual, the test of the device, the sound. Everything is tested many times before it reached the public. And that's the other thing that's important. You have to stay humble. Sometimes we have no idea what we're doing and we're just, learning. You know, we start at the same level as everybody around us. It's all new, and we say, okay, I have no idea. I need to talk to an expert, and you go see the expert, and you learn, and you make something with your new knowledge. Glimpse of the near future. So we're producing at least one project per week of all shape and size. One of the projects that we recently released, and it's available in Steam, is Museum of Symmetry. So that was a VR project with 2D animation in a 3D space. Very successful project. It was purchased by VR Arcade. It traveled the festivals all around the world and won a lot of awards. It was at View Conference last year. It's really a super fun VR project. I'm trying to port it. It was meant for the Vive and Windows Mixed Reality headset. I'm trying to bring it to the Oculus Quest so it has a wider, bigger audience. I'm just waiting. The technology is not quite there yet. We need. It was built in Unity, and we need a better export, OpenGL export. So we need. It should be there in a few weeks. Vulkan, the next kind of version of OpenGL for mobile platform, and when we have that, then I should be able to put it on the Quest. Another project that we did that was very ambitious, it was done in collaboration with a studio in France and the MIT. Is called The Enemy. There is, I think, still an augmented reality version of the project that you can download on Android or iPhone, but the main project was a VR experience that would include 10 people or more. I think the goal was to go as high as 40 people in the same VR simulation. And the goal was there's a big documentary aspect of it. The main characters are soldiers from different wars that were actually interviewed on site, so in the war setting, and 3D scanned there. And the goal was to put you in face of these soldiers. There's a video for that. I don't know if you see well with
The Enemy was born out of my frustration as a photojournalist and war correspondent. For almost 20 years, I have photographed conflicts and witnessed the consequences of huge geopolitical shifts. When I became a father, I simply knew I could not keep working on the front lines. Yet, I was not done trying to understand wars. My friends in Israel, when they know I'm heading for Gaza, can't help themselves but to wish me luck and to stay safe. They believe a lot of people in Gaza are irrational. Also, when I spend weeks working in Gaza and I'm about to return to Israel, my Palestinian friends are telling me the exact same thing. Be careful there. project is rooted in my experience as a war photographer, going from one side of the front line to the other, and finding that the fighters' dreams, hopes, and nightmares are often more similar than they are different. So there is a bigger story than the war itself, and this is the one I want to explore and share. For the enemy, I am using the latest technologies in virtual and augmented realities, so you can engage directly with the combatants and meet them, hear them, and feel them the way I did. In many parts of our world, you create an enemy as a kid without having met your enemy, because the society around you has created an enemy in the other. So the question is, could I be you if I was on the other side?
The first time you do the experience, especially the VR one, and you're face to face with a full-scale combatant, and some of them, I don't know if you saw the ones with tattoos, and they're pretty scary, and it's pretty impressive. And the fact that the rendering is not perfect, you're in front of a 3D model, but the fact that that they were real people and that the voice that you hear is the actual interview of these real people talking to you, it's very impressive. And there's one of the characters or combatant that has a mask, and I remember the first time in the early prototype where I got in front of the 3D model and I just saw the breathing inside the piece of cloth. It was quite intense, very, very impressive. So the sense of presence in VR is really powerful. Another experiment that our Toronto studio did, and this was, I think, for the first iteration. There's 3 iterations or 3 parts to that experimentation. Is the idea of VR in theater. And this is an installation that went to Tribeca and Sundance, I believe, and potentially Venice for the version 2.
Imagine you arrive at the theater, you put a virtual headset on, and you find yourself standing in front of an animated house. And what unfolds is an immersive animated memoir. Draw Me Close is a performance that incorporates virtual reality to tell a story about a mother and her son over 25 years of their lives. And the piece itself is a very, very intimate encounter between an audience member and a performer. So you're in very close proximity, there's contact, you're essentially having a conversation.
As an actor, doing a one-to-one experience performance with an audience member is an incredibly special thing. It's a chance to really communicate a story and this beautiful writing.
We've been brewing the project for a while, and it had a couple of early outings working with Jordan and the National Film Board of Canada to cook it up and explore.
Draw Me Close previewed at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York and then later at the Venice Film Festival, where it had a really very exciting reception. Audiences were surprised by elements of the work. There was a very human story at the heart of the piece. People often locate themselves and their own mothers from the narrative.
I was really excited about being able to bring this into a theatre rather than a film festival. What will an audience get? What will a theatrical audience get out of coming and experiencing Draw Me Close?
It's a very gently guided piece, but it's really intense at the same time. Because I'm playing the mother, I am guiding you and I'm helping you through the whole experience.
I've always conceived of the work as ultimately a theatrical work. This is the first time we've actually been able to really explore that to its full extent. That final incarnation is being brought to the stage at the young Mick. It's been an intimate piece to me and also one to experience.
So the first version of that was really probably one of the early or first experience of that kind of interaction offered to the public. Now we see more and more studios like the DV Group in France that offer immersive experience in VR. There's The Void who is actually now opening places all over the world where you can be in Ghostbusters or in a Disney film and be multiple people interacting, but that was an early test of that kind of work. Yeah, I guess I could, I might show a few minutes of this one, but this was an early pitch for a project that is coming, and it's starting production in a few months. This one uses AI, so artificial intelligence, and mixed reality to create a room scale experience with multiple users around the idea of what is artificial intelligence, how it impacts our life, where it is, because it is already all around us. And I don't know if you know Noam Chomsky, but the idea was to use Chomsky and create an AI of Chomsky. And what makes that possible is that he's one of the person in the world that has the most writing, the most video about him, the most interview. So we have an enormous data bank of how he thinks, what he does, how he is, how he moves. There's a guy at the MIT that is working on a project that made this analysis of how he interacts with people, when he does some kind of expression, what it means. You know, is he annoyed? Is he frustrated? And there's so much material that we have all that information, and the project will be around that. But it will mean that the users, multiple users, will be able to interact with him and be in contact with him, or a different version of him.
You know, your brain is the control unit of some kind of a Turing machine, and it's puzzles everywhere you look.
So, I just remember that you guys are filming that, and there's actually images in that I can show. So I'll have to pass, but it's coming. You're going to hear about it very soon. We just moved in that building, so we were for the last 63 years in the same building that was at the outset of Montreal. Kind of lost a little bit. The building was getting old, and our neighbors were car dealers and the highway. It wasn't very exciting. There's a lot of history in that old building, but it was really becoming a limit to what we could create. I think we needed to invest something like 60 million just to bring the network and the technology to something that was acceptable. So now we moved. That was still in construction, and there's still work happening right now, but we moved a few weeks ago in that new building. So we occupy the first part of the entrance at floor level is a gallery where we have an exhibition space, or a place where we will be able to share our work or do even testing of some of our projects. And then we have a mezzanine where we have a theater where we can show our films. And then we have fourth floor where we have all the studios and facility and the things that we need to create new projects. So that's very exciting. It's very great to be downtown Montreal. So this is really center of Montreal. It's what we call the quartier des spectacles. So I don't know if you've heard about Montreal. There's festival all summers. So the Place de Festival here in front, there can be 300,000 people dancing on jazz music there. It's a very fantastic place to be and to work. So it's very exciting. And I think that's it for this part. I can go in more detail on VR if you guys want, but I would be happy to answer a question now if you have any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. So as told, we have plenty time for questions, so whatever you want to ask him.
No questions? Don't be shy. I'll be happy. Yes?
You keep the audience.
What do you think is going to be the first platform to massively produce and show virtual reality products, like Netflix or TV or movie theaters?
It won't be Netflix. It won't be a movie theater. I think we will start seeing more VR, arcade, and but so far it hasn't been very conclusive. IMAX, actually, I was talking about IMAX. They tried that in their different IMAX theater, and they pulled the plug on that. It wasn't working. The problem with VR is it's really one person at a time, and usually when humans go out of their house, they want a social experience. The theater, the cinema is largely still a social experience, even if you're not talking with each other, you're all in the same room. So the places that seems to start to be successful and make money are the places that offer a multi-user VR experience. That they are the one that can start charging and actually make money with a project. We're talking VR, but I know Sony is experimenting in Japan with mixed reality headset in social context. So if you know about Magic Leap or Microsoft HoloLens, Sony developed their own headset like that, but they're not releasing it yet. They're planning to do installation where multiple users will be able to experience something together. A little bit like what we're planning to do with Chomsky versus Chomsky. These have potential to actually make money because you can have 15, 20 people at the same time for a 20-minute experience that are willing to pay $50 or $60, and that's a pretty good business model. If it's 1-3 person at a time for a 10-minute experience, you will never be able to pay for your infrastructure. But now, VR is going to be a very social thing, and Facebook is making sure of that with Oculus, that each of us individually with our own headset at home, Oculus Quest will be a very successful platform, I think. We will be able to network, interact, visit other people through VR. It's still basic, but they're really working on the social interaction, the avatars, the way we will be able to interact with other users. And I think that's going to be an important thing. I think the Quest will be also very successful. I suspect that this Christmas there's going to be a lot of Quests that are going to be sold. One of the reasons is it's mobile. You don't need to wire it to a computer. It is 6 degrees of freedom. That means you have your hand controllers. You can walk around. The size of the room is not... I mean, you can be in a field outside, you can be in one room in your house, you can be in a big room at school, and you have the possibility to do these room scale experience. It has hand tracking, and that's the next extremely important step. Microsoft HoloLens version 2 has very solid hand tracking, and hand tracking will mean a better way of interacting with the world. I was giving a talk yesterday about how XR, so extended reality, so mixed reality, VR, AR, is going to change the way we create. So we're going to start to see tools for creation, modeling, sculpting, drawing, visualization, that will help people create, will make creation faster, better, will make it possible to previs a lot of what we do in architecture, in urban planning, and hand tracking and good sensor of the environment is a big part of that. So I think the Quest will be the first widely adopted headset, but it's still limited because it's mobile platform. Well, actually, yeah, it's limited because it's mobile. The beauty of what they announced a few weeks ago with the Quest is that they you will be able to plug it via USB-C to your computer, and then you can use the power of your computer to render, so you have the best of both worlds. If you need a very powerful computer to render highly detailed simulation in Unreal or Unity, you will still be able to use the same headset. So you don't need to invest in a mobile platform and a computer, and I think it will be very successful. The problem with the Quest right now is the game or the product on it are kind of limited and fairly expensive. $30, $20 for a game. But you know, people playing PlayStation or Xbox are used to put $34 or $50 for a game. So if the game is interesting enough and the interaction is interesting enough, I don't think that will be an issue. But we'll see. Other question? Maybe questions about the NFB?
Okay, there are no more questions. I can make a question for you. Can you tell us a bit from your experience, which is the creative path that you follow in the development of XR interactive stories, and how it differs from, let's say, standard creation path for
there are big differences, and that's one of the things that I like with my job is that I'm really involved with the creations of what we do from the beginning. So I sit with the creators, with the directors, with the producers, and we talk about the story, we talk about the technique, we talk about where it needs to go, and I'm very often, almost always involved in putting together what we need to get there. And along the way, there will be multiple meetings about, okay, this is the problem that we have, sometimes not just technologically, but with the story. I often say that my job is to find creative solution to technical problem and technical solution to creative problem. Our pipeline always, we've been doing film for a long time, so we know film. That's not a problem. We know animation. Again, that's not a problem. The pipeline didn't change for a long time. Now, when we started doing interactive work, and I will put VR in that category, we realized that things change quite a bit. Where there was usually one film director that was the leader of the whole project, really the god, the person that we listen to, it's that person's vision, it's the person making the call. There's all sorts of specialists under, you know, you're going to have the DOP, the director of photography, you're going to have the lighters, but there's still the director as the visionary and the person that leads everything. Now we have, it's impossible to ask one creator, one person to know everything in a VR project, because there's so many steps, so many people that need to be involved. So already the team is different. The team might be bigger, not necessarily, but the team, the kind of talent that you need is different. So it's not uncommon to have project now where we have multiple leaders, multiple creators that are leading the project. So we're talking project, especially at the interactive studio, we're talking projects that are really made by a team of people that all have their own input and are all important in the project. That's one thing. The other thing is this idea of iteration or agile way of developing project, the same way as software developer work, where instead of doing things in a very linear way like we used to in a film where you start from a script, you do a storyboard, you do an animatic, and then you go in production and you have your, color correction and delivery. Now we do early prototype, we can start making maybe one level, we show this, we test it, we go back, we add to it, we move a little bit forward, we go back, we test, we move forward, and this constant loop of creation is what you see in software development, and that's pretty much what it looks like for game design and for a VR project. And the bigger your project, the more you're going to have that kind of loop for every step of the way. So that's definitely one of the big difference. Other questions?
Any other questions?
Yes.
When you work on VR, do you try to catch the user attention on one single point, or do you try to detail everything around the user?
That's a good question. I still think that as human being, it's very hard storytelling in VR to start with. It's a very different thing, and it's partially because we're used of being told a story, that we like to be taken by hand and we like somebody to guide us through a story. It's been happening like that in books. It's what is happening if you sit around a fire camp and somebody is telling you a story. It's what happened when you go to the movie. You just sit there and there's somebody guiding you through that story. And we enjoy that. We like that. And we don't necessarily want to have to make decisions. You know? That's why I'll make a parenthesis here. Game designer has been working for a long time to try to find games or create games that the person would be able to go through a story, and it would be storytelling in a game setting. And so far it hasn't been possible. It doesn't exist. What they do is cinematic. So they tell you at the beginning what kind of world you're in, who's your character, how it works, and then you play. You know, and you play, it's interaction with that world, but it's not really storytelling. The storytelling happened before, and it happens sometimes you finish a level, there's another cinematic, they tell you what just happened, and you move on. There's no real-time storytelling. In VR, that's what we're trying to do. And it's not easy. You still have to guide the audience for your story to work. Otherwise, obviously, if the person misses the events because they were looking somewhere else, there's a chance that they won't figure out the story. So yes, we are using cues. You can use lighting, very much like in theater, actually, much more than in cinema. In theater, the lighter use lighting to guide the audience. You do that in VR also. You use sound, definitely, to bring sound cues, and that's going to get better and better because specialized sound with first order, second order, ambisonic, and third order ambisonic makes it possible to be very precise in your sound development. And you can make decisions like leave the rest in the back black. You know, at the minute somebody is looking there, they know there's nothing happening there. There's no lighting. The build modeling is very minimal, and they know that they have to look there, and it's okay. We accept that kind of thing, but you have to guide the audience through the story, unless it's a game. Then it's a game.
Actually, we have to do a project in VR, and we would like to start again.
Actually, we have a project to do in VR. We wanted to know if you can give us some suggestion about how to work, how to think about it.
Is it game engine based, or is it with a 360 camera, or?
We work with Unity.
With Unity.
Blender, both together.
Okay. Definitely. I think it's still useful to storyboard to a certain degree, but your storyboard has to be different than the kind of storyboard we were doing with film, where it's a very linear narrative. Now you have to start thinking about where the action is happening. You have to think. My colleague Vince actually has a couple of, and we will send you, I think, the link to that, but a couple of posts on a website called Medium, where he explained his idea of how a storyboard in VR can work. And he's talking about, yes, where the attention of the user is, the different point where there's a chance that the user attention will be more important, or the focus of the attention. And you can use all these cues to start creating some kind of storyboard. The advantage of that is you might end up creating or focusing on the part that are important and put a little less time in building stuff that maybe are not necessary. Especially if you have a limited budget or limited amount of time, it's important to know where the action is going to happen and how you're going to guide. It's a little bit an answer to that previous question, how you're going to guide the attention. So the storyboard is important. Prototyping, really early and really rough. We call that gray boxing, because this is what you can do in UT. You can just, you have a character standing up in that corner doing very little. You can just put a box there, or even if you want to be fancy, you can just map an image on it with the look of the character. It doesn't matter at that point if it's really fleshed out and look good. You just start putting boxes and you start playing with the scale, with the dimension, with the, you can create a room in VR and you think, yeah, it's going to be easy for the user to go from this to there. But then you look at the 3-meter limitation that you have for your basic room scale setup and you realize that that doesn't work. Maybe we will have to use teleportation, or we will have to use something other way of moving around in the space. So prototyping, really rough at the beginning, might answer a lot of the question you have about the story, about the technique, about the way you move in that space. I think that's definitely one of the things you should start thinking about. That's pretty much it, I think.
So I think the type of experiences in XR that you guys are developing, it's mostly for public that is not usually hardcore gamers, and it's usually experienced in art venues. So the time of experience is always different from someone playing the game, which is in his own room, has all the time to go through tutorials, understanding interaction, and VR is still really not so adopted technology for the general public, especially in terms of interaction.
That's correct. Yeah.
So do you have any suggestion when someone is developing something which is not to be experienced at home and all the time you need, but in maybe a shorter time, or to be immediately direct towards the experience for the user? So should something be thought about before?
Okay, so you mean something that won't be at home when they have a lot of time, like a game, but something that will be more in an exhibition setting or in a public place, or yes. First, does it have to be in VR? Because if you have the luxury of having a space, a gallery space, a public space, then maybe you should start looking at that space and try to see if you can make it an immersive experience in that space. Maybe not VR, maybe VR is okay for that, but maybe projection mapping with sensors, if you want to use Kinect Azure or anything, so to add interaction, but maybe just using the space is a very good plan, because then you can maybe include more people in it. You can make the circulation better. You don't have battery to recharge. You don't have headset to clean. Because that's one of the problems too in the public space or a VR setup where you have maybe 100 person going through that VR headset. It needs to be cleaned at one point, disinfected. The battery has to be charged. It's technically it's very demanding. If you can avoid that and still have a great experience, it's probably better. There's a lot of things we can do now with projector, with sensors, all kinds of sensors, with specialized sound in a room, and it's easy. The tools are out there. You can use VVV, you can use Max MSP, you can use. There's so many ways you can create immersive experience. So that's definitely one of the first things you would look. Then, if you do want to go mixed reality, with HoloLens or VR with Quest. Depending on the kind of experience, but I would definitely look into maybe trying to network the headset so you have multiple users in the space. And that can be really, really great, especially with HoloLens, to have 4 or 5 users that can see the same thing at the same place but with their own point of view. That can be really great, and this could work with a Quest also, maybe to network the experience. Technically more challenging, you need a server, you need a way of tracking people in the space, but absolutely feasible. Yeah, that's it. Does that answer the question?
But how is the interaction?
How would you would you change the interaction and the experience itself for the? So would it be easier to experience since you don't, you know?
In order to let people without any experience of VR device, VR tools, to still be able to experience the show.
To go from the VR to make it...
No, to be able to use immediately the headset and the devices.
Oh, so it's easy to
exactly.
It's easy to do. There's no learning. Okay, I see what you mean. One of the beauty of the Quest, I think, and I think Oculus was pretty successful at that. The setup is really, really easy. And because you have that see-through, and that there's a story I have about that. 2 years ago, or is it 3 years? 3 years ago, there was in Montreal a company that was developing a VR headset with 2 cameras in front. What was their name? They've been purchased by Apple 2 years ago, but they were the first of doing that. Now there's Varjo and there's the Oculus, and but they were the first of doing that, and I went and tried a prototype, and it was cool. It could go from AR to VR, but what I thought was really, really interesting was just the fact that because it's see-through, the ease of getting into the simulation for people in an exhibition setting was a lot easier, because when they put the headset, they still see the environment, they still see the person that is helping them, and it makes the transition a lot easier. And then when it's ready to start, they already have this thing on their head, they can feel it, and it makes the transition, and the Quest do that naturally, which is really, really, really smart. And now with hand tracking, or when you see the controllers, I think it makes things pretty easy. It's important though, when you design a VR project, that you give that we call it acclimatation, or this kind of when you go underwater, or when you go in space, there's this SAS, there's this space where you need to adapt to the next environment you're going to go to. It's important to give that buffer in your experience. So to let them look around, see the experience. It doesn't have to be very long, it depends really of your experience. It can be pretty simple, but it's really, really important. And because we're used to VR, we do that all the time, we start not needing that. And because it's our project, we know the project, so we forget about that. But it's really important to think about, and then to test it on people that have no clue, never tried your project, and it's their first time. But you have to give this buffer zone at the beginning, for sure.
One more question. This time is more student side. As you probably know, most of us in this room is from a major, a really innovative and particular major in engineering. And so maybe sometimes we ask ourselves, is there a new job figure on this project on set that maybe 20 or 15 years ago it wasn't present but now is essential?
Yes, it's pretty exciting, I think, to be you guys right now. and at the same time probably confusing a little bit. Probably it's highly possible that the jobs they're going to have don't exist yet. You know, in my parents' day, I mean, in my grandparents' day, the possibility of jobs was probably, there was probably 15, 20, seriously 15, 20 kind of job you could have. In my parents' day, it was probably a few thousand, and now it's probably something like 2, 3, 4, 500,000 possible jobs. Probably way more than that. And it's exponential. Part of it is because there's really specialization is happening. People get really specific knowledge to do specific thing. But part of it is simply because it's changing really quickly. And we hear a lot recently that AI is going to kill jobs, it's going to replace everything. And maybe in 100 years from now, but at short term, what will happen is that some jobs will disappear, but probably 5 more will be created. From automation, from AI, I mean, it's incredible in cinema how many more roles there are now, how many people are involved in making a film, way more than 50 years ago. If you look at the list of people doing VFX in a movie in Hollywood, there's you know, probably 75%, 80% of these jobs didn't exist 50 years ago. And it's a lot of people all around the world. I'm convinced that there's a huge possibility, and that was part of my talk yesterday, we need new designers to start creating user experience, user interface for XR. We seriously need people to start rethinking fonts, typography for XR. We need people to create software to make the tools that makes creation better. My talk yesterday was about the fact that XR is going to change how we create things, and it's going to change what we create. The fact that we will be able to previs in real time the building that we want to create on site with the proper lighting will change how we make building. We'll avoid mistake. I was telling that story in Montreal of this hotel that was constructed for a Chinese client, Chinese tourist, but they built the main door on the wrong side. It was pointing in a direction that is bad luck for a lot of Chinese. So if they could previs that and show it to the client, I think they would have avoided a lot of problems. Urban planning with XR is going to change a lot of things. But these tools don't exist right now, so there's tons of possibilities of creating tools, content, software for these new technology. So for engineers to start thinking about how we can use that, how we can make better tools, there's so much space for a really, really great invention. Does that answer the question?
Any more questions?
Hi.
I've seen that you're working on artificial intelligence, but my question is why?
Why?
It's for entertainment, for commercial.
There's two. There's integrating AI in there's 2 or 3 reasons. Integrating AI in the storytelling aspect. So to create stories that adapt, that are customized for the person playing the game or in the experience. So the idea is to have not something that is pre-scripted, something that will really adapt and react to the user. The other thing is developing it to use tools, to make tools. Recently, part of our Art House project, I had a native filmmaker that wanted to use Deep Dream as a way to put color in his film. So in the end, what I suggested was to use Deep Style Transfer, which is kind of a subset or something that came from Google Deep Dream, where he could create a style for his film, the visual style, color, type of line, and then he could do his animation, traditionally 2D animation, and we would put it through the deep learning and apply the style that he created, and it would be done automatically. So creating tools that can automate some of the things that we do and make it easier, or bring it in a direction that we're not capable of doing right now. And there was a third thing that I don't remember, but I think there's multiple use for AI. One is definitely deep learning or learning, so finding information. One thing that I would like to achieve is a software that can do in between. So the Deep Style Transfer was able to put color and line style, but it was really bad and still is really bad at doing the in-betweening that we need when we do animation. So an animator creates a frame, and then we call them keyframes. So there's another keyframe of the action later. And traditionally at Disney or traditional animation, there would be the really good animator make the keyframe, and then the assistant will do all the in-between that we need to get the action right. And the good animator will make keyframe every time this action has to be where the character should be at that time. And I would really like to be able to do that automatically on the computer instead of having people, an army of people retracing and doing characters. But right now the AI doesn't understand the action well enough to make a good job, where the animator understand weight, understand the way we move, understand that we have to do everything as an arc, and can do a really good job. The AI doesn't do a good job for now, but I think that's something we can probably work on and develop. So there's many ways I think we can use that.
Thanks.
No question? Okay, I have a last question for you. Before you talking about storytelling VR and the problem about driving the attention of the viewer where the action is. And so there are basically two options. One, okay, you go on with your story and you try to drive attention to the right place. Or second, you can try to use tricks like in Fly Me to the Moon from Google Spotlight Stories or The Crowd, I think Baobab Studio. So yeah, I mean, you wait for your user
to look at the right place.
So when the user is looking at the right place, then you activate the action. So how do you think it will affect the story if you do something like that? So if it is not, let's say hardly scripted, but it's still interactive since it's the user that activates it.
Yeah, if it's just waiting for the user, I think it's still very scripted. You just have maybe some kind of filling action happening, and when the user look at the right place, then the story move on. There's still pretty much a script there. AI will bring maybe this possibility of the story really adapting to what the user is doing. So that's an option. It's storytelling in VR. It's very interesting because I believe that just being there, being in a VR space is also a story and can also be a story. Just that feeling of presence, just the fact that you are witnessing something, it's also a story, and it's a story that we don't have to script and to tell. It's your story. Every user will come out of that experience with their own interpretation of it, and that's fine. So it's also possible to create VR experience that are going to be simply that, an experience. But an experience is a story. Every time we have a memory and we remember something, it's really our brain tricking us because we don't remember things the way they really are. Every time our brain is rebuilding that memory for us, and every time it's changing. So even if we think that, you know, when I was 5, this thing happened to me and this is how it was, our brain is just playing a trick on us because we don't have a picture in our brain or a capture of how things were. It's reconstructed every time. So I think creating experience that have a value for the user, and the user to just be there and witnessing something is a story in itself, and it can be really good enough and very interesting.
So, if there is no any more question, okay, I would really like to thank again Eloi for his speech.
Thank you for having me.